What's up, Power Painters? Taylor Payton of tapeart.com and powerpainters.org here, coming to you today with another Power Painters video. So in this one, I just figure I would do some simple anatomical exercises. I find that these, which are from Michael Hampton's drawing course, which I'll leave a link to in the description box. I find that these are some of the best you can do for figure drawing in terms of inventing your figures, being able to understand the component parts in sort of an abstract way, and just create based on the knowledge of the architecture of the body, just understand all these various shapes and curves and forms and how they relate to one another, and then use those as placeholders when you're planning and designing some of your more involved pieces with more complex poses and what have you. Fortunately for us, the figure is just so very complex, and yet we have simplified it down to some of these main parts, which I will talk about. One of the parts that you're seeing is just that S curve, which I use to exaggerate the motion of the gesture being the story of the character. We want sort of an interesting pose in the gesture, and so all I'm doing right now is working my construction and getting that interesting pose down using that S curve, which if you watch the video before this one, the Beginner Drawing Course Week 0, we talk a little bit about unity with variety, and that is one of the better principles to keep in mind as you create your gestures and your figures. Some of the shapes you're seeing me use in order to create that unity are just a series of, spheres, ovals for the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis at this point, and just sort of some stand-ins for the limbs, kind of like bones, if you will, and just getting the joints in there. Basically, I'm just laying in that first S curve, which sort of represents the spine in a way for me. Generally, I just use it to place the three big ovals, the head, the torso, and the pelvis. And then I will just wrap the limbs based off that. Usually you want to take the weight-bearing leg after you get your three main forms established. So you get the head, the chest, and the pelvis established, and then you find the weight-bearing leg. And after you have that down, then the rest of the limbs usually come into play a lot easier and a lot more accurately. So there are a lot of other figure drawing videos on this channel, but this is kind of one of my morning routines for practicing, for studying, for improving my construction and my anatomy. And you'll see me not just go through the process of constructing figures like I'm doing right now, but also start to dig into some more anatomical aspects. So things like the various, how many ribs are in the rib cage, or trying to practice the radia and ulna in the forearm, or the tibia and fibula. See, like, I'm still learning these anatomical concepts, even though I've been drawing figures for quite a while. You don't need to know all the technical names for stuff, but it's good to just keep on expanding your awareness and improving your understanding of all of these different concepts that are going to come up as you study the figure, because as I stated a little bit earlier, the figure makes a great basis for understanding just art and creating images in general, because everything we can apply to the figure we can pretty much apply to a full illustration or a storyboard, or various aspects of character design, because all the principles that are inherent in nature are somehow transposable to other areas of design, and that's going to be for later videos. But for right now, like I said, I just want to sort of take you into my thought process as I am working on improving my anatomy and my figures and my construction. So this is a little bit more of an anatomical exercise that I quickly did, and it's using an image that once again comes in the drawing course, figure design, or figure drawing and invention by Michael Hampton, and I'll have a link in the description box. But basically, I'm just drawing from this image that I'm seeing and memorizing the various aspects of the bones and how they line up and what the shape of those bones are, because ultimately the shape of those bones is going to dictate the more pointy bits versus the softer bits, the pointy bits being closer to the surface and the softer elements sort of receding into the flesh, into the forms of the figure. And trying to remember where everything connects so that you have a better chance of creating a balanced and well proportioned figure. There are so many aspects to figure drawing and anatomy and all that that it helps to sit down and study this stuff, especially if you're interested in drawing your own characters in the beginning. And even if you start fairly realistically, you can always stylize later. I find that handling some of the larger scale problems and learning the fundamentals is more helpful than just trying to jump into a specialty right away, because that specialty will inevitably uh, fall short if you don't have the fundamentals to build on it anyway. So on one side, I'm just doing the more complex stuff. On the other side, I'm simplifying the things that I'm seeing. And really, at this point, I'm not super immensely concerned with the quality of the drawing. Most of it is just for getting a mental picture and understanding better. So the drawing is somewhat reflective of the understanding, but the drawing for me is also just a tool of learning. It's like as you sort of pick up on these visual cues and these rhythms and these the architecture of the body, you begin to notice the patterns that appear and the landmarks where we can sort of just count on being there, where we can count on, having them as points where we can refer to and balance other things out by, because everything has its relationship. So you think of like the pit of the neck or the belly button, things that run down the main middle symmetrical line of the body. And so I'm learning at this point, sometimes relearning and reinforcing my knowledge of some of those things. You can do this pretty much in your own style, in your own fashion. There are so many amazing figure drawing resources out there, or just drawing courses and items in general. And as long as you are persistent in your efforts to understand and you are consistent in your practice, you will see improvement, you will see results. I mean, even doing it for just a day, I can feel like a very small level up. If you really attune yourself to what it is you're doing, you can start to feel, wow, that was just a teeny bit easier than it used to be, or I understand this a little better, or something really clicked in my head. And that's the kind of stuff that I live for when I'm working on any creative endeavor, are those little, pathways to progress, because the time you put in is going to pay off as long as you are consistently just pushing yourself a little bit and understanding new areas that before had eluded you. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just drawing some of the skeletal structure of the scapula and the arm and all of the digits on the hand. And now I'm also drawing the leg and all the things like the femur and the tibia. So the femur being the upper part of the leg bone, the tibia being the one that relates more to the calf, and then I believe it is fibia and not fibula. Like I said, sometimes I haven't really cemented them. I didn't put them on flashcards or anything. I was just mostly learning from a visual standpoint. It is helpful to know the names, but as long as you're able to get them down visually convincingly, then the names are not, the greatest necessity. It's like you don't need to know that you're playing a, you know, D major 7 chord on the guitar to know what it sounds like. You don't have to know the exact technical term. It just, as long as you know how to use it in its context of the song, it will serve you. Everything else is just additional layers of complexity. So once I've understood some of the bone structure, then I usually like to try implementing that where I hadn't before. So you notice earlier in the video the figures were very simple and the bone structure was sort of inferred. Now I'm doing a much more accurate reproduction of those bones on the figure as I'm trying to invent them from my mind using similar poses to before. And I'm again drawing the three main masses, and I'm juxtaposing all these different angles and rhythms. So basically that unity with variety thing I talked about earlier, that is, you have this unification, which is typically a more linear thing, and then you have some asymmetries, which is where the variety comes in. So the asymmetries in this case are the sort of things that run along the rhythms of the body. So if I were to explain that in a more abstract way, it's the S curves that sort of allow the frame to look like it is having movement and dynamism. So these are sort of serpentine shapes that travel through all of the limbs. Nothing is completely straight because that stiffens everything out. And when you're gesturing the body and inventing the figures, you want to keep in mind the serpentine shapes and how they are going to give you a visual rhythm to all the limbs. So as you pay attention to things more and more, you'll start to notice that this principle comes up all the time in bodies, whether they are animal, whether they are plant, whether they are human. You'll notice the things that are more linear and the things that are more curvilinear, things that have more of a variety, and you'll see the symmetries, whether that symmetry is, vertical, horizontal, quadrilateral. There are all these ways that things can be sort of divided or understood. And the more that you look for ways to understand the various rhythms and shapes and ideas in the body, and you try to break that down to the most core principles you can, the easier time you'll have drawing other things as well, even if you may not have all the technical knowledge backing it. So this is just an amazing exercise in my experience if you're prone to more figure-based art, to try and understand the skeletal system, the some of the muscles, the S curves, the unity with variety, the general gestures, and just try to create these figures one after another, because then you'll be able to roll them out easier as you're figuring out your ideas, and you'll have a more solid basis for when you're ready to take those things to the more advanced illustrative levels. And yeah, I spend about an hour, if I can, every morning or at night, sometimes both if I am so lucky that day. And I'll just do a lot of these. And I will try to start a little more simple, then go a little more complex, and I'll harmonize parts from A and B, and just keep on, synergizing and creating and understanding. And I think that that is the main point. It's not to create the most beautiful studies or drawings unless, the studies are directly related to the aesthetic that you're going for. You want a really beautiful portrait from life, then yes, go for that. But when you're doing construction and understanding, it's more about the general flow and the technical side, and just trying to apply these principles over and over and over, making sure that things have, unity with variety, asymmetry with symmetry, balance, and corrections of imbalances. So this is about wrapping it up here. This was sort of how I like to study anatomy. I hope you enjoyed the video. A bunch of links in the description box for cool Power Painter stuff. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and I will be uploading more as I am able. Take care, Power Painter. I will see you in the next video.